Hello and welcome back to the FL Studio Music Production course. This is lesson 6 and in my opinion the most important lesson, where we will be learning music theory. We're going to start off with the very basics and then gradually progress into more advanced theory. Let's start by going into the channel rack and loading up an FL keys by pressing the plus and going to FL keys. Now let's click up here and go to the grand piano preset. We're now going to right click on FL keys and go into the piano roll. Here inside of the piano roll, you can see that we have a piano along the left hand side of the screen. This contains the white notes C, D, E, F, G, A and B. And also the black notes, which are referred to as sharps or flats, which are one note or one semitone in pitch above the respective white note. We have C sharp, D sharp, F sharp, G sharp and A sharp. These can also be referred to as D flat, E flat, G flat, A flat or B flat, where they are one note or one semitone in pitch below their respective white note. You can also see that after each note there is a number. This shows which octave the note is in. The higher the octave, the higher the pitch of the note. Now in modern music, songs will contain melodies that belong to a scale. There are many different scales, all of which we can see up here in FL Studio if we go to View and Scale Highlighting. However, the music that we typically listen to, that's in the charts, uses the major or minor scale. You may have heard of this before. Essentially, a scale determines which notes we can use for our melodies. Any notes that are outside of the scale will sound noticeably off. We then have what's called a key. This will be the root note of the scale, and will be any of the notes on the piano, which we went through earlier. In this example, I'm going to use the key of C. Starting with a major scale, this starts on the root note, skips the C sharp, adds the D, skips the D sharp, adds an E, adds an F, skips F sharp, adds a G, skips G sharp and adds an A, skips A sharp and adds a B. This of course is repeated in other octaves too. All of the notes here are in the C major scale, so we can use any of these when creating our melody. Typically, melodies using a major scale will sound happy, whereas melodies using a minor scale will sound sad. So we are now going to use the key of C and see which notes are in the minor scale. Starting with the C, we'll then skip a note, add the D, add the D sharp or E flat as it's commonly referred to, then skip the E and add the F, skip the F sharp or G flat and add a G, then add the G sharp or A flat, skip the A and add the A sharp or B flat, and then skip the B. Now this is what the C major scale looks like, and this is what the C minor scale looks like. As you can see, some notes feature in both scales, some only appear in one scale, and some don't appear in either. Now that we have our scales down, we can move the entire scale up or down notes to change the key of our melody while staying in the major or minor mode. Shifting these up 2 notes will make these a D major and D minor, and shifting this down 1 note will make it a B major and B minor. As we mentioned earlier, some scales contain flats or sharps, which are the black keys on a keyboard. I'm now going to explain how you can determine whether a scale has flats or sharps. If we take the C minor scale, we have the following notes. If we were to write these out, or say what these notes were, we would say C, D, D sharp, F, G, G sharp and A sharp. This looks and sounds pretty confusing, as we have D and D sharp and G sharp, which are 2 letters repeated twice. If we were to word these as flats, then here's how this looks and sounds. C, D, E flat, F, G, A flat and B flat. We now have no letters repeated twice, and this looks much more straightforward. So in this case, the black notes in the scale would be referred to as flats and not sharps. One other point, which may be worth mentioning, is that a minor scale is technically a mode of the major scale. This means that each major scale has a respective minor scale. So if we go back here and add the C major scale, and compare these scales next to each other, we're now going to duplicate these into all of the other octaves. We have the C major scale here and the C minor scale here. If we select the C minor scale and shift this down a few notes to an A minor scale, we'll see that this contains exactly the same notes as in the C major scale. In this case, C major has the respective minor key of A. You may be thinking, well, if there's the same notes in the C major scale as the A minor scale, then how do I know what scale my melody belongs to? It's a great question, and the answer to that is that it's determined by the tonal center of your melody. A tonal center, also known as a tonic or key center, is a specific pitch or note around which a musical piece revolves. It's what it will tell you online. I'm going to let you in on a secret. In 99% of modern chart music, this is the first note or chord in your progression. Essentially, if you start with an A minor chord, then your tonal center will be A, so you'll be playing in the key of A minor. And if you start with a C major chord, your tonal center is C, so you're using the key of C major. We can actually go a little further. There are more modes of the major scale. In fact, there's 7 in total. Ionian, which we just call major, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, which we call minor, and Locrian. As you can see, all of these are listed up here in the scale highlighting. Here we have the major Ionian, minor Aeolian, and all of the other ones down here. You may have been wondering in previous videos why we use the Ionian major and why we use the Aeolian minor. Well, here's your answer. So we can now draw these in using the stamp tool, which is this button up here, and then go to scales. We can take C major Ionian by clicking on this and clicking on the note C, then going to Dorian, which is here, and using the key of D, then using Phrygian and taking the key of E, taking Lydian and using the key of F, Mixolydian and taking the key of G, minor and using the key of A, and Locrian and using the key of B. This shows that all of these modes contain exactly the same notes, the only difference being the tonal center, which is the bottom note here. So to repeat, whichever chord or root note we start on first determines the tonal center, and therefore what mode we're playing in. Although, as mentioned earlier, 99% of modern music uses the major or minor mode, so don't worry too much about the others. Now we're going to create chords. Chords are fundamental in a melody. Almost all popular music uses a chord progression to add emotion to a track. Chords described as playing multiple notes at the same time. A chord with 2 notes is called a dyad, 3 notes is called a triad, and 4 notes is a tetrad. The most common chords in music theory are triads, so let's focus on these first. When creating a triad, a chord with 3 notes, there are 4 different types of triad chords you can use. These are augmented, major, minor, and diminished. In modern music, 99% of the songs you hear will only use the major and minor chords, but I'm going to show you all 4 of these chords anyway. Here's what a C major chord looks like. And here's what a C minor chord looks like. Essentially, the difference between a major and minor chord is that the middle note is 1 semitone or note lower in the minor chord. Here you can hear that the major chord sounds happy, and the minor chord sounds sad. What you'll also notice is that the C minor chord contains a D sharp or E flat, which is not in the C major scale, as this only consists of white notes. However, by transposing the chord up and down, we can see that the E minor chord does fit in the scale. We can therefore use a combination of major and minor chords in the C major scale to create a progression, provided they use the notes that are inside of the scale. Now, as I just mentioned, we have augmented and diminished triad chords. Here is what the C augmented chord looks like. As we can see, transposing this up or down will never give us a chord with all white notes, and therefore it will never sit in the major or minor scale. As a result, we cannot use augmented chords in a beat with a major or minor key. However, diminished chords do. Here's what a C diminished chord looks like. And if we transpose this up, we can see that the B diminished chord does fit within the C major scale, and therefore we can use this in a beat using the C major scale. We can now create a chord progression using our knowledge. We're going to use the A minor scale for this progression, which, as we've already discussed, contains only white notes. We're going to start with an A minor chord, and also an E minor chord, which sit inside of the A minor scale, as again, they contain the white notes only. When I draw my chords in, I literally just draw the bass note in, then skip a note in the scale, then add a note, then skip a note in the scale, and add another note. This will always create either a major, minor, or diminished chord. I'm now going to shift these around to create a rhythm. You'll notice here that the chords are different lengths. There are different rhythms that you can use in your melodies, and this is completely up to you as a producer. There's really no right or wrong here. Just make sure that you have a snap to grid on, I use a quarter beat, and that these notes hit on the beat, so on these thick black lines here, or on the third step, so in between each beat. Otherwise the rhythm will sound off. Now we're going to press Ctrl and Shift and left click and drag over our root notes. We're now going to press Ctrl and C to copy and Ctrl and V to paste. We're then going to press Ctrl and the down arrow to shift this down an octave, and then drag this across so that it's in line with the chords. Now we're going to transpose notes from the chords up and down octaves by doing the same thing again. So let's highlight the B and the G note here in the E minor chord and press Ctrl and down to shift this down an octave. Now we're going to press Ctrl and drag over the entire chord progression and press Ctrl and B to duplicate this. Now let's go into our channel rack and replace the piano sound by right clicking on FL keys, going to replace and selecting GMS. We're now going to go into the preset bank by pressing this button here, going to pads and textures and selecting pads 1 MC. We can now close GMS down, close the channel rack. Now let's go back into the piano roll and press shift and up to shift this up 1 semitone. We're now no longer in the key of A minor and instead are in B flat minor. So let's go to our scale highlighting by pressing the drop down up here and going to view, scale highlighting and changing this to B flat or A sharp. Then press the same button again, go to view, go to scale highlighting and change the mode to minor. We can now lay down a simple top line using notes inside of the B flat minor scale. Here I've chosen to start with the top note of the chord and then simply work my way through the scale. I then decided to increase the tempo to 140 beats per minute. Here's how this sounds. Again, for the top line, there's no right or wrong. Just use notes inside of the scale and listen to what you like the sound of. Now we've created a melody completely from scratch, using our new music theory knowledge. In the next lesson, we'll be using this melody to make a full beat.